I'd like to welcome everyone to the Landmark College Academic Speaker Series. Thank you for coming tonight. Also welcome to our VCTV audience. This will be broadcast at a later date. The mission of the Academic Speaker Series is to promote an intellectual environment at the college and to facilitate important discussions for this community. We're really fortunate to have Andrew Stein here tonight. I just want to mention very briefly the other speakers in our series this fall, and we'll follow up with lots of emails and communication about it. On October 5th, Ambassador Adrian Basora will be presenting on democracy's regression in the 21st century. Can this global challenge be reversed? That's particularly timely right now with the events in Afghanistan. November 16th, the artist Jessica Tam will be presenting her work. The title of her talk is People Mountain, People Ocean on Painting the Crowd. To introduce Andrew Stein is Brian Young, who is the chair of the science department here at Landmark College.
Thank you. So I'd just like to welcome all of you. I'm Dr. Brian Young, chair of the STEM department, and it's my honor and privilege to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Andrew Stein. For over the last 2 decades, Dr. Stein has been studying human-carnivore interactions with specific focus on African wild dogs, lions, hyenas, and leopards across southern and eastern Africa. Since his 2001 leopard study in South Africa, Dr. Stein has become a global leader in leopard conservation, assisting in national leopard surveys and leading an international team for the IUCN Red List to assess the global status of leopards. While he still has considerable interest in leopards, as you will hear more about tonight, he also has active research programs exploring non-lethal approaches to mitigate livestock conflicts with lions in northern Botswana and wolves on Montana ranchlands. Dr. Stein has published over 20 scientific articles, organized field training courses with the Smithsonian Institute, and has been featured in wildlife documentaries on National Geographic Wild and BBC Wildlife. He is a member of both the IUCN Cat Specialist Group and the Hyena Specialist Group, and he is the founder and director of CLAWS Conservancy. And what CLAWS stands for is Communities Living Among Wildlife Sustainably. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Stein.
Thank you. Have you ever gone to bed at the end of the day feeling like you're a completely different person from the one when you woke up? That you had an experience during that day that fundamentally changed you and who you are and how you think of yourself. That happened to me on my first trip to Africa when I was in Kenya doing a study abroad trip. And on a morning game drive, I encountered this leopard. Now, when I was younger, I was always interested in wildlife. I was always interested in cats. My first stuffed animal was a pink panther. But when I was young, I was really focused on other animals that had real specialties, real specializations. For example, the cheetah, because it was so fast. But I soon realized that there were a lot of people studying cheetahs. Tim Caro, Sarah Durant, Laurie Marker, all of these people were making huge contributions to cheetah conservation. Then I was interested in lions. Lions are social, the only real social cat. But there were lots of people studying lions. George Schaller wrote the definitive book. Craig Packer studied them in the Serengeti for 40 years. There were studies all over East and Southern Africa. And when I saw this leopard, I realized there's not a lot of information out there on this species. This is a way that I could actually make a contribution to the conservation of a wild cat. And I soon realized, although cheetahs are fast and lions are social, leopards are perfect. They're the perfect predator. Of course, they're beautiful. They're secretive. And it's this secretive nature that can actually cause some of the problems that we'll talk about tonight. They're powerful. They can pull their prey that can sometimes weigh 2 or 3 times their body weight straight up into a tree. They're adaptable. They can live just about anywhere. They can live in the desert, they can live in the mountains, they can live in the rainforest, and even some of them can live in the city. And this is a picture of a leopard in Mumbai, in India. Now, when I was in Kenya, I heard this legend where a man was transporting a leopard in the back of his pickup truck in a cage, and he had a tarp over it, and he was moving through Nairobi, one of the most populous cities in Africa. And he was getting tired and it was late, and he pulls into a driveway, looks under the tarp, the leopard growls at him, he lowers the tarp, goes inside and goes to sleep. Next morning he wakes up, looks under the tarp, and the leopard's gone. In the middle of Nairobi, there's a leopard loose. There's a big hole in the cage. He alerts the Kenya Wildlife Service. They warn everybody in the city. Leopard loose in Nairobi. Everybody's freaking out, as you would imagine. Kenya Wildlife Service goes out, sets 5 different traps in that same neighborhood. The next morning, they have 4 leopards in different traps, and not a single one of them was the one that escaped. We are living among leopards without realizing it. They're that good. Now, one of the things that I had learned early on is that leopards are the most widely distributed wild cat on Earth. You find them in southern Africa, down here, West Africa, into the Middle East. There are some small populations, the Persian leopard in Iran, parts of India, Sri Lanka. Look at this huge area in China and Southeast Asia, Java, and then the Amur region of the Russian Far East. So they're everywhere. And because of that, they're likely the large carnivore that causes the most amount of conflict with people of any of the large carnivores that exist. So I wanted to study them, and I wanted to figure out what I could do, how I could get involved. So I did a lot of reading about leopards, and there wasn't a lot to read in those days. This is around the year 2000, where there's maybe 24 papers written on leopard ecology and behavior. And what I determined was the key to what I wanted to explore was territoriality. Leopards are solitary, and they hold territories to keep other leopards out. Now, I wanted to apply this idea to reducing conflict. Many of the ranchers and farmers in Africa would use all sorts of deterrents, flashing lights and loud noises and all these crazy things, and it would scare leopards initially. But they're too clever. So they get habituated to these things, and then they walk right past these loud noisemakers and go and kill cattle. But the one thing that leopards respect is each other in their territoriality. They actually evolved to understand and interpret the territorial system of other leopards and stay away from leopards. So when they set up these territories, it's actually too costly for them to fight, because even if you survive conflict, you still may be injured just enough that you can't hunt properly, and then you starve. So leopards have a system of communication using scent marks, particularly urine that they spray, just like this one, on a tree, and it communicates information to other leopards that are in the area. And it tells them about the age, sex, strength of the other animals in that area. And in doing so, it can actually keep leopards out of certain places. Now, if we could harness this and then spray leopard urine from one leopard from a different area into a new place, we might be able to keep them out of high conflict areas with ranchers. So I contacted 40 zoos across America. 2 of them were able to collect leopard urine from me. They sent it to my parents' house. I put it in the freezer next to the frozen peas. My mom wasn't that thrilled about it, but she let me do it. And at the time, after reading all these papers, I got the advice, why don't you contact people that are studying leopards today, right now in 2001, and instead of starting a whole new project, why don't you just connect with somebody that's already there, and it will eliminate a lot of the initial work that you have to do. So I contacted the chairperson of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN. And they have this group called the Cat Specialist Group, which is made up of all the major cat experts of the world. And it's a pretty exclusive group. And so I contacted the chairperson. He actually wrote back to me, which was amazing. And he gave me the list of 3 people that he said were studying leopards. Now remember, leopards are the most widely distributed cat on Earth, and there's 3 people, according to the Cat Specialist Group, studying them at the time. And I recognized the names on the list because I had read a bunch of the papers. So number 1, Ulas Karanth. He's an Indian scientist studying tigers. He collected information on leopards only opportunistically. He wasn't actually focused on them. Number 2, Fumi Mizutani, a Japanese scientist who did her Ph.D. on leopards in Kenya and had finished and moved on and was studying livestock. Number 3 was a biologist named Chris Stewart, a South African, who moved to Saudi Arabia and started studying caracal, which are also called the African lynx. If you're keeping score, that means, according to the Cat Specialist Group, there's not a single person on Earth in 2001 studying leopards in the field. That's unbelievable. So Chris Stewart tells me, I've got a friend, he's got a ranch in South Africa, here's his email address, he wants to start a research program, this would be perfect, there's lots of leopards there. So I said, let me give it a shot. So I packed my bag, I packed the leopard pee in there amongst my clothes. Luckily it didn't break. I think any of you who have cats know that cat pee isn't coming out of any clothes anytime, right? So I packed my bag, moved over there. I was there for 5 months. Met some biologists that work for the government. They helped me set my first traps. And at this point, I had never worked on a field research project in my life. I hadn't trapped even a mouse. And there I was in South Africa trapping leopards. And this was the first leopard I ever caught. And it was the biggest one I ever caught. He was over 150 pounds, which is like basically my weight. So we set these traps. They're like these big cages with sliding doors. You put a bait in the back. There's a foot plate. The leopard steps on the foot plate. The doors slide closed behind him. And then it's sitting there waiting for you. So I called one of the state biologists. He came out. It was actually Friday night of a holiday weekend, and he was about to go away with his family. But he did the right thing and came and helped us out. So we go and we check the trap, and he brings his dart gun, and we're walking up to the trap. And I know there's a leopard in there, and it's starting to get active because it's dark. And this guy, he's walking next to me, and he goes, Andrew, I got to tell you, I'm shaking right now. And I look, and his dart gun is like this. And I'm standing next to him, and I'm like, Lyle, have you done this before? And he said, yes. And I said, how many leopards have you darted? And he said, 25 or 30. And I'm thinking, this is my first leopard. I'm not that nervous. I'm like, maybe he knows something I don't know with all that experience. And then, of course, like through the course of a couple attempts, we were able to dart this animal and pull him out of the cage. Now, one of the challenging things at the time was I didn't have the confidence to really assert myself as a field biologist. So the rancher was having a family reunion at the time, and they all wanted to see this leopard. So this is what happened. Everybody comes out and starts petting this leopard that's asleep. I don't know how long it's going to sleep for. I don't know when it's going to wake up. I don't know how quickly it goes from like a twitching ear and a twitching tail to a ferocious, wide-awake cat that's going to eviscerate everybody. So I was a bit anxious, I would say, at the time. Luckily, nothing went bad. We were able to put this collar on. The leopard got up and was able to wander off. I spent the next 2.5 months tracking this leopard and one more that I captured on foot, most of that time by myself because all the other researchers had left, hiking for up to 9 hours a day looking for signs of leopard. And I realized I must be making a lot of mistakes here. I need a lot more experience. I need to figure out how to be better at my job. So from here, I ended up getting a Fulbright scholarship and I moved to Namibia. And this is where I started my Ph.D. work. And I studied leopards in Namibia on farmlands for 3 years. And what I realized is that leopards in protected areas in the national parks are going to be fine. But if I'm actually going to do something to contribute to the conservation of this species, I need to be out where the action is. I need to be out on these ranches where I can talk to people and find out what the problems are so that maybe I can help leopards and ranchers coexist. So I went out to the ranches and I started talking to people. And in my first Farmers Association meeting, I stood up at the front and I said, listen, I'm an American, I'm not Namibian. I've never farmed a day in my life. I'm not going to tell you how to farm. But I'm here for 3 years and I'm going to collect information on leopards. And please let me know if there's anything that any information I can collect for you that's going to help you with your operation. And one of the ranchers raised his hand in the back of the room and he goes, we hate predators here. And what's more, we hate predator researchers. I was like, okay. I've been here 10 minutes. Like, what do you hate about predator researchers? And he said, you guys collect all this information, you put it in your computer, you write some fancy paper that nobody reads, which is for the most part true, and we get no benefit from it. And we still have the conflicts, and our cattle are still dying, and the leopards are still dying. So help us out. If you're going to be here, work with us. So I realized that that's what I needed to do. So I decided to do an economic analysis because all these farmers were saying if the leopards pay, then they can stay. If we can earn money from them or at least not lose money from having them here, then they can stay on my ranch and I'm not going to do anything about it. Now these ranchers had already eradicated lions, spotted hyenas, rhinos, elephants, and all these other species. So they were capable of eradicating anything. And they said, we kind of like the leopards actually, as long as they don't cost us too much. So I did questionnaires of all these ranchers, and I wanted to find out what % of their calves are they losing every year, because the large cattle are too big for leopards to kill. So it's really the calves that are 9 months old or younger. And what they said is they lose about 4% a year, which is about $1,400 per ranch per year. But then I asked them, how much are you willing to lose? How much are you willing to tolerate in losses? And they said about 3.2%. Well, that's not that big of a difference. So that's about $1,200. So the difference is about $200 a year. So I figure if I can make up that $200 per year per rancher in this small region, leopards are safe. So of course, we start looking at other options. The first is tourism. So I interviewed a bunch of tourists and I said, okay, tourists, you're here in Africa. What animals do you want to see most? Top 5 animals: lion, leopard, cheetah, elephant, rhino. Leopard is in the top 5, actually in the top 2. Now leopard is typically the animal most people come to Africa to see that don't see it, right? They come and they see elephants. They come and they see lions. They come to see leopards and they go home disappointed. So if you're ever in Africa, and some of my students that went on study abroad actually saw a leopard with me, which was, I was super excited about it, even still. You realize that that's what people are coming to see and they don't see it. So if you can provide an experience that allows people to see a leopard or even a chance to see a leopard, people will pay for it. So I interviewed these tourists and I said, how much would you be willing to pay even if there was a small captive leopard on the property? Would you pay $25? And over 65% said yes. Now that's not optimal, right? We don't want to be putting leopards in cages for people to gawk at. So then I said, all right, if there's a bait station, right? They drape a little bit of meat over a branch with a floodlight and the leopard comes. If there's a 25%, 50%, 75% chance of seeing a leopard in this place, would you be willing to pay $25? And a 25% chance, 43% of the tourists, almost half of them were willing to pay $25, just for a 25% chance of seeing a leopard. So the discrepancy between these comes to basically 120 leopards a year, like that people are willing to pay. But there's also trophy hunting that occurs in Namibia. So talking to some of these farmers that allow trophy hunting, they say that the permit is a little over $3,000 per animal. The farmers usually get half of that money, so like about $1,700. If 2 or 3 leopards are hunted in that area per year, and then they divided up that money by each rancher, then they would all tolerate leopards, all the rest of the leopards in that area. Now, trophy hunting is controversial. Not everybody is in favor of it. But if you realize that many of these ranchers are killing 2 or 3 leopards on their own in each ranch, if you only remove 2 or 3 for the entire region, that's a net gain of leopards in that area. So there's plenty of discussion about it, but there's opportunities for people to actually use some of this money and save the rest of the leopards in that area. So I presented this analysis to the ranchers, and they were quite interested in what I had come up with. But I also studied leopard ecology. So I worked with local researchers, and we set up motion sensor cameras, and we did a population survey on the ranches. And we set these cameras, they take photos, and then we look at those photos and the unique spot patterns on the sides of the leopards that are actually like a fingerprint. Each leopard is unique. So you can look at these pictures and identify and count leopards in that area and generate population estimates. And I ended up doing this for the entire country of Namibia eventually. So this was a big, big project and was quite successful. From here, after 3 years, I ended up moving to Botswana. And I did my postdoc, and I was running a research station that studied lion, leopard, cheetah, spotted hyenas, and wild dogs. Now, some of the graduate students at this research station were interested in animal interactions. Particularly, one of them studied wild dogs and how lions and spotted hyenas affected wild dogs. The other student studied cheetahs and how lions and spotted hyenas affected cheetahs. Now, of course, I'm sitting there wondering, well, what about the leopard, right? You're studying the other 4, and they said, well, leopards are too clever. They are in their own system by themselves, right? They're able to survive on that landscape even among those larger competitors just because how clever and skillful they are. So, set traps. I was able to capture some leopards. And one of the things that happened was that in one of these cages one day, I parked the car and I start walking down this narrow path, and I see the cage, and the cage door is closed, and there's actually a leopard cub in that cage. And I'm alone. And I look at the cub a little bit. I don't want to frighten it too much, and it's snarling at me. And then I hear behind me a deep growl in a bush. And so I kind of slowly backpedal, and I get back to the vehicle, and I close the door, and of course that's Mom. Now these leopards, the mother stays with the cub until about 1.5 years. And then if you're a male cub, you move off and you try to find a territory. If you're a female cub, usually you take over part of Mom's territory and you live in that area. So there's a real connection between the mother and the cub, especially female cubs. So I went back to the research station, brought another trap, gave the cub some water and like a little bit of meat. And then I was able to dart the cub and the mom. I put a collar on the mom, and this is the cub here, and the cub is sleeping. It's not awake. And so I was able to learn about the connections between parents and offspring as part of the study. Very fluffy. Yeah. So of course, during these studies, I was able to also try to investigate how leopards live in these landscapes with these other larger predators. When I was in Namibia, the lions and spotted hyenas were gone, so they were the biggest thing out there. In Botswana, that's quite different. And if you can see here, there's African wild dogs at the base of the tree, and then there's a leopard here at the top. So whenever leopards are in trouble, they go straight up a tree. And usually they can hang out there for a while and wait out the other predators who get bored and then move on. Oops. But I did a lot of free darting leopards, trapping leopards in Botswana. We were able to put satellite tracking collars on these leopards. And at one point we had like 6 or 7 leopards with satellite collars. And I would use radio telemetry equipment to follow the animals on the ground using a battle-tested Land Rover. And using the points from these collars, when we map them out using geographic information systems, like on the computer, you start to see these clusters of points. You think, what are they doing spending chunks of time in one place or another? And of course, it's because there's a kill there. There's something keeping them there. They're feeding there for a couple of days, especially if the kill is quite large. And so when we drive and investigate these clusters of points, we find things like this. Right? This leopard has hung this impala up in a tree and looking very satisfied with itself in the meantime. Now, leopards have the most adaptable diet of the large predators. They can take anything from these giant eland, which are the size of a big bull cow, all the way to small birds and catfish and rodents and even small insects. They'll eat anything. And it's a part of that adaptability that allows them to survive in so many different places. But as I was able to observe leopards in Botswana for the first time, when I was in South Africa, it was farmlands and I couldn't get near them. When I was in Namibia, I'd drive for hours and hardly ever see them. Even the ones that I had collared, I could never see them because the bush was too thick and they were always hiding. Well, in Botswana, I could actually follow them and observe them. And one of the great things I was able to see was leopards actually hoisting their kills. And I started to wonder, what are the circumstances that cause them to do this behavior? This is one of the signature behavior of leopards. When you see documentaries, oftentimes leopards are in a tree and they pull the kill up there. Well, why do they do it? As you watch this male, this is a video I took, watch how he is looking at the tree, trying to find the best way to get up. And of course, this is a big effort because this warthog probably weighs as much as he does. And he's carrying it in his teeth, which is unbelievable. So he's watching, he's looking back and forth, he's taking a few breaths, and then up he goes.
That's a whole alligator.
Because they don't want other predators to get their food.
So watch him go, he's not done yet. Look, just by the skin of the warthog's neck, he's able to pull it all the way up. All right, so.
What if he gets all the way up there and he drops it?
Yeah, that's a problem. Sometimes that happens. All right, let me just continue for a sec, and we'll get to some of these things. So this leopard, as I'm observing him, and he's doing this, I start to wonder, what are the circumstances? So I collect data on 200 kills that I'm able to find, and I try to look at differences in season. Wet season, the grass is really tall. Dry season, the grass disappears, and you can see for a long distance. Males are much larger, but females have dependent cubs. Who is going to want to secure their kill more easily and with greater effect? Who needs to secure that food more? So then I start looking at the differences by season, and I find that the dry season is when they hoist more often, because during the wet season, they can actually rely on their camouflage, something leopards do very effectively. Dry season, their competitors can see them at a distance and they're more likely to hoist. Now, as many of you said, the males are actually more likely to hoist their kills, probably because they're bigger and stronger. They're twice the size of the females. So hoisting a warthog like this, it takes less effort than it would for a female, or an impala, or something like that. So that was quite surprising, because I thought maybe females might be needing to hoist their kills more often. Now, one of the things that I found as part of this study that was really surprising was that I followed this male. His name was Charles, and you can see Charles at the base of the tree. There he is, right there. And at the top of the tree, he had actually hoisted a juvenile giraffe. Now, this giraffe must have been at least 4 times his weight. I didn't see him actually hoist it myself, but there's no other way that thing is getting up there. So how does this leopard manage to pull something 4 times its weight up a tree? It's unbelievable. When I saw this, I actually started laughing. I couldn't believe it. So through these different studies in different places and different environments, I was wondering, where do leopards stand? And there's all these different pressures on leopards. But most of the time, biologists and cat biologists aren't talking about leopards at all. They're talking about lions and tigers. Lions and tigers have both lost more than 90% of their historic range. So of course, it's an emergency. Like the house is on fire for lions and tigers. But leopards are still out there, and we're not sure what's going on. So over the course of the time where I started doing these different projects, other biologists in different places start studying them, and we start to build a picture. Now, one of the first things we notice is that leopard habitat is disappearing. And if we look at Southeast Asia, just the forest cover that leopards are dependent on for their prey and for camouflage is going fast. Just in this 20-year period, just looking at the forest cover and the lack of connectivity between these remnant forests make it very difficult for leopards to survive. And this isn't just Southeast Asia, this is Central Africa, this is parts of Indonesia, right? A lot of places where leopards live, this type of effect is happening. Human-leopard conflict causes big problems throughout their range. And of course, this is a picture of a leopard that got into a town. You can see this guy is about to bring down a club on its head, which is horrible. When I was putting together some of this information, I was in touch with biologists all over Leopard Range. And one of my colleagues from Egypt sent me this picture. This is a big male leopard from Elba National Park, which is in the southeast of Egypt, where it was assumed that leopards had gone extinct. And so somebody gave him a call. They said, we found this leopard, and somebody had killed this leopard. The leopard, I think, had killed one of his camels, like near the park. It was assumed leopards were gone, and then all of a sudden one pops up. And this is a big, healthy male. Are there leopards still there? We don't know. This may have been the last leopard in Egypt. Trophy hunting can be a challenge for leopard conservation. I mentioned earlier how trophy hunting can provide resources for potential conservation, but that's only if it's done well and only if it's done sustainably. And in many countries, the permit allocation process isn't sustainable, or the individuals that they select for removal or harvesting aren't the right individuals, and there needs to be some type of structural system that if countries are going to allow this, we need to make sure that it's done in a responsible, sustainable way. And I'm working with the government of Botswana right now. I submitted the National Leopard Management Plan a couple months ago, and it included ways of, if they're going to do trophy hunting, ways in which we can try to do it sustainably and adaptably so that we don't hurt the population overall. When people hunt leopards and they do taxidermy, sometimes you get things like this, which to me, it's almost like a comical representation of a leopard. This was in a parking lot in Maun in Botswana, and people were walking up and getting strange pictures with it. Other threats to leopards are traditional use and there are tribes in South Africa, the Zulus, that will actually harvest leopard skins and use them in traditional ceremonies. In some of these ceremonies, there can be thousands of people, and all of them want their own leopard skin to show their power and represent their connection to their culture. So there's an organization called Panthera that does a program called Skins for Life, and they actually work with textile industries in China to produce leopard print garments that they can sell to local people within these tribal communities to replace the killing of leopards throughout their range. Yeah, I'll take questions at the end, if you don't mind. So this brings us back to the leopard range map that was done in 2008. All right, and again, we've got these huge areas of Central, East, and Southern Africa, even a large portion of West Africa. You can see all this area in China, really nice continuous habitat for leopards, even parts of Iran. At the conclusion of my work with these international colleagues for the IUCN Red List, this is what the map looked like. The dark green is all where we know leopards are present. The yellow is where they might be. And then the gray, this dark gray, is where they used to live. And what we found is that 65 to 70% of leopard range is gone. Leopards don't exist there anymore. So while we're focused on lions and tigers, which is understandable and important, leopards are slipping away. And we need to do something about it. So leopards across their range are divided into 9 different genetic subspecies. So one of them is the African leopard, right? This is the one that I've focused on primarily. And you can see Africa, there's still some areas where leopards are doing okay, but there's still a lot of fragmentation that's happening, and that range is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Next is the Arabian leopard. The Arabian leopard is here on the Arabian Peninsula. You might be able to see a couple little green dots. There's less than 200 leopards left in the wild on the Arabian Peninsula in Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Yemen. And because they're separated out, some of these populations might be less than 20 individuals, and there's no way that those animals are going to be able to bridge the gap and connect to these other populations. So they're going to become genetically inbred, which is a significant problem. So there's programs now, that Arabian Leopard Fund, that is actually working with captive breeders of Arabian leopards in the Arabian Peninsula. There's actually 200 captive leopards, and they're looking at opportunities to release them back into the wild to build up genetic diversity. But you can look at this habitat where these leopards are located. Panthera pardus saxicolor, this is the Persian leopard. Persian leopards are, there's about 800 to 1,300. These are endangered. The Arabian leopard, of course, is critically endangered. There's the Indian leopard. There. Indian leopard is vulnerable. It's about 12,000 to 14,000. By the way, I hadn't mentioned it, but the African leopard, we still don't know how many there are. It's still a big question mark. So there's different organizations working in different places, and we want to consolidate that information to come up with a number so that we have some idea of what's going on. There's the Sri Lankan leopard. Right? The Sri Lankan island there off the coast of India. Sri Lankan leopard, there's 700 to 950 left. They're critically endangered as well. There's the Indo-Chinese leopard that are in Southeast Asia. These, there's less than 200 or 2,500 in the wild. These are endangered as well. There's the North China leopard, and these are less than 500 left in the wild. You can see how shaggy they are because they got to live in areas that have snowfall in the winter. And then there's the Amur leopard. On the Amur Peninsula, there were less than 60 critically endangered as well. Then there's the Javan leopard. On the island of Java, the most populated, human-populated island in the world here, there's a couple remnant populations there. Javan leopard, there's 350 to 525. They're also critically endangered, although I read something yesterday and I talked to a colleague saying that they might be listed as endangered. So that's a little bit better news, but they're still in trouble. And this is a picture I took while visiting colleagues in Indonesia. So here's this leopard that I met, the first leopard I ever saw. And when you look at this picture, you see this serene environment and this beautiful animal in this African landscape. And we were luckily the first vehicle to come upon it. But within minutes, this is what happened. It was completely surrounded by over 20 vehicles, people beeping their horns and yelling and all this stuff. And there's this leopard sitting on top of this branch, trying to, it couldn't even escape if it wanted to. So it just waited people out. We sat with that leopard for 3 hours and eventually the vehicles moved on. But even within an environment where you see this animal and you think, oh, this tranquility, the beautiful African bush, they're still being harassed. So there's much work to do. So what can we do? How can we actually address all of these threats and issues and things throughout their range? Well, one of the first things we can do is support local researchers, people that live in these communities that are from those areas that are motivated to help protect and conserve these animals. These are friends of mine from Indonesia, and you can see they have a collar that they want to, a satellite collar that they want to put out on leopards. This is my friend Wahyudi, who is studying leopards in Baluran National Park in the eastern edge of Java. And I spent a couple days with him, and we set traps and all sorts of stuff. It was really nice to see his passion. And there's people throughout their range working on leopards that have that same kind of passion. Also, trying to get back to some of these scent marking studies that I originally wanted to do 20 years ago, and looking at leopard communication. Now, a colleague of mine in Botswana, working for the Botswana Predator Conservation Trust, has a biochemistry lab, and he found a chemical it's called the tomcat chemical. It's like one hormone that's present in leopard urine that he's experimenting with to see how wild leopards react to it. And he's got motion sensor cameras up, and you can actually see that leopards, I've seen some of the footage, they walk up, they sniff it, and then they turn around and walk away. So there's actually some potential here for options. Now, in the meantime, with leopards, of course, I think of them as the perfect animal, right? They can live just about anywhere. They can eat just about anything, right? They can live close to people. They can live in the forests and the mountains and whatever. And it's their secretive nature that makes people assume that they're actually doing quite well. And as you look at this clip, this was a time when I was tracking the mother of this cub. And I'm driving around looking for the mom. I can't find her. I sit and I'm just like, what am I going to do? I can't find her. And then I look over and there's this cub sitting in this thicket staring at me. And it's their secretive nature that makes people think that leopards are going to be okay. But in the end, just like this cub, in this clip, they could very easily move off and disappear. And this cub is so beautiful.
It's basically the size of a husky.
No, much smaller than a husky. So with that, I want to say thank you for your time. If you want to learn more about some of the work that I'm doing and some of the things that I'm trying to put in place for leopards, my organization is the Claws Conservancy. The name of the program is Leopards Without Borders. Again, I'm a member of the cat specialist group, the IUCN cat specialist group, and I want to thank Landmark College for allowing me to take a sabbatical last semester and spend a lot of time thinking through how I want to re-engage and continue to work on leopards. So with that, I'll take any questions that you have, and I'm happy to stick around. So thank you. Yes?
How many years does it take for a leopard to reach maturity?
So for sexual maturity, it's usually around 3. Now for the males, often they're not able to mate just yet because they have to compete to get a territory. So usually they're around like 4 or 5 when they're big enough and strong enough to take over a territory, but females are able to mate around 3. Yes, Becky.
How can you try to male lions with the male leopards with cubs within
How aggressive?
how present?
Not present at all. In fact, they just sort of do their own thing. So the females are left to kind of take care of the cubs. Now there are cases, and I've heard of like anecdotes where females with the cubs, as long as those cubs belong to that male, they'll actually spend time together. And that's something that's not well understood at this point, but that's something that does happen. But if it's not the cub of that male, that cub is in danger of being killed because the male wants to bring that female into estrus in breeding conditions so that he can have his own cubs as soon as possible. Yes?
Okay, so here's a confusing part that I was having. The pantheras are big cats such as like leopards, cheetahs, lions, etc., and cats relate to them. Their main features being that they can't meow and they have a type of claws. And if cheetahs are sort of a subgroup of panthera but not directly related, then why aren't cheetahs related to cats since they can meow?
Okay, good question. So there's a lot of confusion, especially around the term panther. Panther is sort of a general term for like a larger cat.
Well, sort of a subgroup of megalodon, yeah.
Yeah. So when you look at something like a cheetah, and you're like, well, that's a big cat. Some people might even call it a panther. But typically, when we talk about panthers, it could be anything from like a black panther, which is actually a melanistic leopard, or a melanistic jaguar. Florida panthers are actually mountain lions, right? So it's a general term. Now for the animals that we call big cats, that we put in that category, it's lions, tigers, jaguars, and leopards. It's not cheetahs, it's not snow leopards, it's not clouded leopards or other things. And that's just like what you mentioned, the big cats have this extra muscle attachment in their throat that allow them to roar.
So that's the main like distinguishment between like panthers and like other things, even though they can't roar. Even though like big cats can't meow and cheetahs can, which would make you think that they're more like the cats. The thing that distinguishes panthera, such as big cats, is that they have a throat problem. The thing about it known that helps them roar. And
Right.
cats have something similar, even though they can't roar.
Exactly. So like a cheetah can purr.
Mm-hmm. So,
But it can't roar.
They don't have the big calm
Muscle.
back stuff.
Right.
But the cats can't roar, but they have something similar, right?
Yes. But it's different enough that they categorize them
Yeah,
differently.
just enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't look for that question, thank you.
Oh, good question. Yeah, you in the back.
I noticed the collars have different colors. Is there any rhyme or reason for the classification, like identification of different cats? Based on like their collars. I noticed that they came in different colors.
Yeah, not necessarily. We weren't thinking that at the time. I mean, when we ordered them, they sort of came in a particular way. Like, you probably noticed one was like light brown with spots and things, and then some of them are black and whatever. We didn't actually, it was just we got a batch and some of them had those colors and some of them didn't. But it does help with identification, that's true. Oh, yes.
Do you foresee any longer-term consequences in terms of behavior due to using the organic scent to propel other cats? I think that they don't interact anyway with how they maintain their own territory.
So you mean within species? Yeah. So I think that there is a chance when we're experimenting with this that we may see behaviors that we didn't expect. And when that happens, or if that happens, we need to take that into consideration and either stop doing those experiments, because we don't want to have like a lasting negative effect on the wild population. But I think even if we use them for a short period of time, let's say during calving season, where the calves are most vulnerable and we can put scent out for a couple months, that may be enough just to kind of keep the leopards out of that area. And then we can remove those scents and then things can continue. But we'd have to be monitoring all the leopards in that area to understand like what full effect we're having. And then we have to make a judgment call as to whether that's too disruptive to the wild population. But that's something that needs to be a serious consideration in any study like this. Yeah. Mike?
I was going to ask, what has been the most surprising thing you've learned yourself about leopards?
I think when I saw that giraffe in the tree, that was just the craziest thing I'd ever seen. Like, that just made no sense to me. It made no sense. Like, I would almost assume to see a leopard with like a crane, like moving the thing up into the tree more than it actually physically being able to do that. Like and the other thing was how quick. When I caught that first leopard, and I was just, I had no experience. So I'm like walking down the road by myself for hours, talking to myself and whatever. And I'm thinking, I've heard all these stories about leopards potentially attacking people. And if a leopard comes, I'll just grab a rock and whatever. And then when I caught the first one, and I'm walking up to the cage and the cage door is down, and in order to catch them, you got to disguise the trap really well. So it's all these branches, and the floor of the trap is all this like sand and stuff on it, so it looks exactly like the surrounding environment. And so I'm walking up, and there's this leopard, and the door is down, and I had approached the trap a couple times over the previous couple weeks with the trap down because it was a windy night, and it just sort of closed the trap. So I'm walking up, and the door is down, and I'm looking as I'm approaching. I don't see anything. There's no movement. And I walk up to the door of the trap, and I'm about to pull the trap door open. And I see in the back is this leopard like this, that big, big male, and it's looking up. And then it growls and like charges the door of the trap. And that thing, it hit the door of that trap 3 times before I could even breathe. And I was like, this thing is so lightning fast. You wouldn't even know what happened. Like, you would have no idea. And so like I backed away from the trap, and all of a sudden the leopard like calmed down, and then it was silent again. And I'm like, did I just imagine that? Was that like my worst nightmare, just in my mind? Or is there actually a leopard in there? It was so stealth, it was so fast, it was so powerful, it was so angry, And that's when I realized that thing's not going to be charging from down the road. That thing's going to come up from here, and I'm not going to know it was there the whole time. That was shocking. Yeah. Yar.
Is it possible that the collars had any effect on the leopards? Like making them more attractive to others? Because I know with birds, if you put like colored whatevers or shiny whatevers, it makes them more attractive to females. Is anything like that possible with the leopards? And could that have possibly affected your studies?
That's a really interesting question. I'd never thought about that. And like your example with the birds is quite cool. The only thing I would say is that leopards aren't really selecting all that much. Like, they'll get it where they can, to be kind of crude. But basically, like, if you're a male and you hold the territory and there's a female there, like, you meet up and you're both trying to pass on your genes.
It's not really gonna matter because
Yeah.
the pool isn't that large.
Right. There's not a lot of sexual selection happening in that same kind of way.
Probably didn't make so much or any difference there.
Yeah.
So to go back on like the males interacting with their cubs, do you know why in some cases the males are interacting with the cubs and in other cases why they're not?
I don't know. I mean, there's probably a familiarity between the male and the female, and if she feels that he's not a threat, then she'll allow him to interact with her cubs. Usually she'll stash them away so that they're not around, but it's all circumstantial. It's hard to know exactly, and there aren't that many studies that have spent a lot of time observing leopards, so there's still a lot of mysteries there. There's one example, this is a crazy example. So I have these, and it's not to do with males, but it has to do with interactions. And I have a friend that used to work in this very fancy lodge in South Africa called Londolozi. And they're famous because they have these leopards that are habituated to their game viewing vehicles. So when people go out, they're like pretty much guaranteed to see at least one leopard, and the leopards come and they rest in the shade of the vehicle and all this stuff, and everybody has a great time. But the guides know all those individual leopards because they've observed them for years, right? And they actually know the lineages of all these different leopards over time. So what one of these guides observed was that there was a female with a cub, and she left that cub with her mom. So the mom was like babysitting the cub for a couple days, and then the mom came back and took the cub, and then the grandmother leopard sort of moved off. Now, if you don't know that population that well, and you can't identify those individuals, you're like, oh, mom with the cub. A couple days later, oh, there's a mom with the cub. But you don't know those types of interactions. There's still a lot of things to uncover about the behavior of these animals that's not easy to determine because they're so secretive. Yeah.
Time for one more question.
Yes. No, sorry, I'll take her. And then if people want to hang out for a couple minutes, I'll answer.
So the cats that I know are all pretty good at wriggling their way out of collars. What steps do you have to take in the field to make sure that those stay on the leopards and not get removed?
That's a great question because it's really difficult. Because when you're putting one of these collars on, first of all, the collars are expensive. To get a vet is expensive. To go through all the effort to trap the thing is expensive. You don't want to stress this animal for no reason. And so when you put a collar on, you're worried about the effects that it's going to have on that animal, like in the short term and long term, whether it's going to affect its behavior. Leopards in particular have really thick muscular necks. And so when they tuck their head in to grab their prey to pull them up a tree, is that collar in the way? You know, so you're thinking about all of these things when you're putting the collar out. So when the collar goes on, as a rule of thumb, basically, you don't want it too tight because you don't want to choke the animal, and you don't want to put it on an animal that's young that's going to grow because it can really restrict their breathing and stuff and can be really detrimental. So you put them on animals that are of a certain age. They're determined by their teeth and scarring and stuff. But you also don't want it too loose. Like what you're saying, like if they just pop it over their head, then you're like, what did we do all this for? And we stress this animal out for no reason. And I've had that happen where, you dart a leopard, really stressful. You put the collar on, the leopard's waking up slowly, put its hind feet in the collar, pop, and then runs off. Like, great. So what we do is when we dart the animal, we put the collar on, and then we try to put at least 2 fingers between the collar and the neck. And usually the collar can shift a little bit. But then we also try to pull over the head to see if we can actually pull it over. And if we can't, and there's enough room in the collar, then we think it's good. But like usually when I'm doing this, I'll ask the opinion of 2 or 3 other people. Like it's not like a unilateral decision. And sometimes I'll say, I think this is okay. They're like, let's go 1 notch tighter, or let's go 1 notch looser, and then we test it again. When they're sleeping, they're usually asleep 45 minutes before we give them like an antidote drug to wake them up. So that's usually plenty of time to get the measurements, get blood samples, and all of that, and then put the collar on and test it.
Thank you very much.
Let's thank Andrew for his great presentation.